Does your back squat ever look like this? Today I want to cover 4 barbell only exercises so you can do them anywhere, anytime. If you're able to do a back squat, you can do these exercises to see if we can't correct this issue. Now the primary reason for this issue will be from one of 3 reasons. It'll be from lack of mobility, lack of strength, or inadequate skill and technique during the back squat. These exercises will help you cover these to different extents, but you may need to work on these from extra areas. These will primarily be covering them from a technique and strength issue. A little bit of mobility, but these won't be sufficient by themselves in most cases to cover the mobility. The first one we're going to use is close stance back squat with toes pointing straight ahead. This is very simple and very straightforward, and the reason we want to do this is we want to bias that forward knee travel and that shin angle going as far forward as possible and staying as far forward as you can possibly make it. The biggest issue when people's back squats look like a good morning squat is that their knees retract too early on the squat, or they never go far forward enough during the squat at any point. This close stance back squat forces your knees to go really far over your toes. It points your knees in a really forward direction with this toes forward direction and biases this huge amount of dorsiflexion so we can emphasize the quads as much as possible. I want you to do this as a drop down set or back off sets after your main exercise if that quad weakness is a big issue. Do this for 3 or 4 sets of something like 8 to 10 reps. Not crazy weight. For example, if you're squatting 200 kilos, you can do this at something like 80, 90, 100 kilos for a bit of volume for a couple of weeks in a row. The one problem or one of the cons from this exercise is that if you have that mobility lacking in your back squat that stops you pushing your knees over your toes, this exercise won't be very, very useful for you because you won't be able to do it correctly without the toes forward, heels close together position. So we can modify this slightly and put a plate under our heels on top of our weightlifting shoes to give us this much extra needed fake dorsiflexion so we can push those knees even farther over our toes. This will allow most people, even if you have the mobility issue, to use this exercise effectively. The second one, in no particular order, is one of our favorites that we use, which is zombie grip heel elevated front squats. Now, these are really great because they really force us to stay as upright as possible and push our knees as far over our toes as we possibly can. You can use any kind of toe stance you want in this in terms of angle, as long as it's pretty close. You can toe out or toe forward, whichever feels the most comfortable for your lower back and what gives you the best quad engagement. These are a really good exercise because it forces you to stay upright, and if you do them incorrectly, you're going to see a big lean in that torso. It'll give you some really good proprioceptive feedback on how you're doing the exercise without needing a huge amount of technical understanding or technical nuance and familiarity with this particular exercise. The downfall of this exercise is the fact that it does load your back a little bit too much in some circumstances. So if you're a powerlifter, you're a strength training athlete, you're already doing lots of back squats, maybe you're doing a low bar back squat, you're deadlifting heavy, this can add a little bit of extra fatigue to your upper and lower back that you may not necessarily want. So you need to prioritize these appropriately during your training block to ensure that this is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. Now, the good thing about this exercise is it can also help your deadlift. So if you lack a lot of quad engagement off the floor, this can be a really useful exercise to cover both areas for your back squat and your deadlift. Loading of this exercise is similar to the heels elevated close stance back squat. It can be done once a week, usually for sets of 8 to 10 reps. You also don't need to go very heavy with this one. I've had, for example, one of my lifters squatting 330 kilos, and the heaviest he went with this was 120 kilos for 8s. So you can understand, relative to your own loading, you don't have to blow these out of the water in terms of loading to get the benefit from them. The third exercise is touch and go back squats. These are constant tension. These are similar to what we might have seen old school bodybuilders do. These are as much a skill as they are a strengthening exercise for the quads in particular. So if you lack that feeling with your quads, if you feel like you could never really get in touch with your quads, activate your quads fully from the floor at the bottom of that squat when you're trying to stand up or on the way down, these constant tension touch and go squats where you never fully lock out at the top are a great way of teaching this while also biasing the quad dominance for the strength aspect of what we're looking for. So we get that skill component and that strength component of these. These will generally be done for, again, about 8 to 10 reps at moderate loads to heavier loads. If you really wanted to, you could bias this as one of your main exercises. If you find that quad strength is a really big problem for you and you're starting a new block, you could put this in at the start of a high volume phase and do most of your reps touch and go like this to really force that adaptation. These work really well, they're quite uncomfortable, and they will fatigue your quads for other exercises. So you do have to be cautious when you're using these. These are also great for teaching you just to get through that set a little bit more efficiently. If you're trying to increase your work capacity, these are incredibly useful. That last amount of extension isn't massively important. I don't want you to stop just at parallel. Come up to just before lockout where your knees aren't quite locked out, where we still have a little bit of hip extension and knee extension left to go. You could again do these for 8 to 10 reps and you can load these a little bit more aggressively. One thing you do need to be cautious with these is that you are, of course, obeying the technique that we're looking for, where we are pushing those knees forward and biasing that quad dominance. These are great. A little bit more advanced compared to the other exercises because you do have to be a little bit more cautious with the loading, but they do prove quite useful if you implement them correctly. Lastly, we've got front foot elevated split squats. Now, I love these exercises when we bias them for that knee as far over the toe as possible. Now, that guy didn't invent these. These are one that people have used for a very, very long time. You may have seen split squats done where the back knee drops to the floor. We may have seen Bulgarian squats where the back knee drops down as much as possible. But if you're trying to improve your quad dominance in the squat, the front foot elevated split squat where you push your knee as far over the toe as possible is a great exercise for 2 reasons. One, we're actually getting a little bit of mobility done here. We're getting a little bit of that stretch and deep flexion. We're also getting a bit of a stretch in terms of dorsiflexion. So we're possibly working on some of the mobility deficits that you may or may not have in your squat. The other aspect then, if we're trying to work on something from an assistance point of view, doing some unilateral bias exercise is really important because you'd be surprised just how much discrepancy you can have from side to side when you're squatting. You may often find that one side is much more dominant, and it pays to cover all bets here that some amount of assistance exercises should be biased towards single leg work, and this allows us then to ensure that there's no major discrepancy and one side isn't taking a massive dominance compared to the other side. So I'd recommend using one of the first 3 exercises with the Bulgarian split squat to ensure that you cover all your bases. This should produce some amount of adaptation after about 6 weeks to maybe 2 months. If you go after this diligently, you should see a really strong change in that, especially if it's a skill and strength deficit. We should see a meaningful change in your squat after about 2 months. Now, there's other exercises we could use, like the belt squat, which we're a huge fan of. Maybe the hack squat is useful. A lot of you guys ask that. Sometimes people even ask about leg press. The problem with those is that the setup for them can be quite difficult. Not all gyms have them available to you. You may be training at home in your shed, for example, and only a barbell and plates might be the only options to you. So I wanted to give you something that could have actually effectively trained this without having some extra equipment. And again, it's still just one step away from specificity, so we are getting some of that extra volume. I would prefer if you didn't do these in separate sessions because we don't want to spread that leg loading out over the week too much. I'd like to keep it confined in these sessions, and you shouldn't really need to spread it out too much in the week after that session. Shouldn't be costing you too much. Now, don't add these in if you're coming near a max. So if you're in the last 1/3 of a program, don't start adding these in here. It's going to add a little bit of extra fatigue and it's going to fatigue your peak. So don't add them in here. Wait till you're at the start of a new block to see how effective these might for you. If you'd like more information like this, check out the Sika Strength newsletter, sign up to the strength training section of the newsletter, and you'll get a lot more information like this multiple times per week, so don't miss out.